All right, so as far as solar goes, there's a type of system that you see everywhere, but it's one of the most, people I guess are the most uneducated on it. How do ground mounts actually work, and what's the process involved? And I mean, just let's talk about ground mounts, right? Sam, I know you had a lot of questions about those. What's one of those that you wanted to start with?
Yeah. First, how much land do you need to do a ground mount? When does it make sense?
Sure. So let's first explain what a ground mount is for those that don't understand it. A typical solar install is a rooftop solar project. That's where we're building on an existing structure. And every home on Earth has a roof, and every one of those roofs gets a whole lot of sunshine, depending on the trees and the shade and things like that. And so typically, we're always going to install on the roof first. If that's not an option, if the homeowner does have land, if the roof condition is not what it needs to be for a solar install, then a ground mount is an option. A ground mount is basically we build a structure anywhere on the homeowner's property to then install the solar panels. And it's a very simple structure, typically made up of 3-inch or 2.5-inch galvanized Hollander pipe, I think they call it. And it's a thick-walled structural pipe that is concreted into the ground and post holes.
Isn't that just what they use for fences?
That would be the thin-walled stuff. So this is much
Similar.
stronger, heavier, but looks identical from the outside. And some of the cons or the negatives of a ground mount are it's going to take up a piece of property. It's going to take up a pretty sizable area of land. Whereas when you put it on the roof, that's unused space and it's not going to get in the way of anything. So an argument against the ground mount is that it's going to take up some space. It's typically going to be more expensive because we have to build the structure. Right, the house is already the structure that we're going to install on when we do a rooftop solar install. But ground mount, the structure has to be built, then the solar panels need to go on top of it. So it's going to be more expensive and more work. We have to get wiring from that ground mount to the house and then to the main electrical panel that's typically on the side of the house. That usually requires a trench from the structure, from the solar ground mount to the house. If the homeowner decides that they want to put this solar structure, 500 feet from the house, well, a trench that's I think our trench requirements are 18 inches in most jurisdictions. An 18-inch deep trench for 500 feet is a ton of work, which costs everybody money, right? If we run into rocks in that trench, that is even more work. And unfortunately, that cost gets diverted to the homeowner or the contractor, the salesperson that sold it. Some of the benefits, and obviously I could go on and on about the challenges, but some of the benefits are you get to place the system exactly where you want it. That would create optimal production, right? So if your good roof space is oriented east or northeast, and then the west or southwest facing roof plane is just not an option because there's a bunch of heat vents or gables or skylights or whatever it is, the chimney, then ground mount would be a better option because we can orient it perfectly south at the proper degree and get way better production that way.
The reason it's better that way is only because you need to buy less panels, right?
Exactly.
To get the production that you want.
Yep.
So that is the benefit, is pointing any direction you want, but you're obviously going to do it south to purchase less panels. If trees are there, or bushes are there, or shrubs, and they're shading those panels, then why in the world would you do a ground mount? Because it takes away the benefit of doing it, right?
Absolutely.
But how much land do you actually need? I guess that's based on property line offsets, right?
Yes.
And it's different in every jurisdiction, is that right?
That's correct.
And it's different for the backyard versus the front yard versus the sides of the home. Or if there's homes near you, how do you guys obtain that information generally?
99% of the ground mount projects we've built have been in unincorporated parts of the county. That's county jurisdiction. which is all of the mountains, all of the deserts, all of most of East County, and where you would think people would have acreage or space for these ground mounts is that unincorporated part of the county. And we've built one solar ground mount in the city of San Diego, and it was in La Jolla, and they just happened to have a big southwest facing slope that went off of the backyard, and they had a roof type that we couldn't work on, and so we were able to build it back there. And it was very apparent that San Diego was not familiar with residential solar ground mounts because their permitting process was absolutely miserable for a ground mount.
So that could slow down the speed of getting the install in.
Absolutely.
Outside
Yeah,
of
we
your
went back for
control.
3 corrections with permitting, and there
Wait,
were
corrections? Isn't that your fault, not theirs?
corrections come from one individual that is a plan checker at the county. Every plan checker has different things that they're looking for and different ideas about how it should be done. You're not working with a computer system here, you're working with a human being that's going to make decisions however they feel.
I agree with that. It's just I've heard that commonly in the industry from salespeople, and I just want everyone to understand that it's not necessarily the contractor's fault. That it depends on who you get behind the counter and the mood that they're in.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
100%.
Yep.
There is zero consistency between plan checkers.
Jay, you found that too?
Yeah, absolutely. We've done quite a few ground racks, and it depends on the plan checker.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a huge factor. Other huge obstacles, obviously, that we just touched on were property lines. What you need to know where property lines of that property that you're looking at. How do you acquire those property lines? Well, you got to go down to the county of San Diego. You got to wait in line like going to the DMV, and so that's about an 8-hour process. And then also once you get those property lines, now you're going to run into all these obstacles like these people potentially have 5 acres of land, but they're running into easements, they're running into leach lines, because most of all these properties, they're using a septic system instead of sewers. So they have all these leach lines that are going into their property. You can't build a ground rack on that. So
Yeah, so you have
there's
to obtain a ton of information. So this is why ground mounts are definitely more expensive. It's not just the material you're building on, it's the processes of it.
absolutely,
right?
yeah.
And if you do have to go to county 3 separate times and wait 8 hours each time,
That
it's
costs
not like
money.
you're going on your day off. You're paying W-2 employees to go there and you're paying them. to get that
Absolutely.
8 hours,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
But to get back to Sam's question, which was,
What's the land requirement? What's the property line offset?
I guess that all depends on what the property offset is, and then you deduct it from whatever their space is, right? So what is the max offset you guys have heard of?
Generally
for property
speaking,
lines?
there is no minimum amount of land, right?
Okay.
We need an open space that's as big as the ground mount footprint is going to be.
Fair.
Okay. The setback requirements are in the county. It depends on how large the lot is, but typically it's going to be 50 feet from the street, I believe. It's going to be 15 feet from the side property lines and 10 feet from the rear property line. Those are your standard setbacks. Solar gets an exception, and you can go within 5 feet of the rear and side setbacks.
So if you're building a carport with solar on it, then it would be the
15
traditional.
feet.
Okay.
Yep. Unless that's a good question. If it was a permitted structure as a carport that you were then putting solar panels on, I think that it would, and again, this is all up for debate with your plan checker, then it would fall under the 15 feet. But if it was,
A really tall solar
Exactly.
ground mount. Okay.
exactly.
So, a ton more questions about that. Does it
Yeah.
count as a structure with the county? Because I know there's a limit to the number of structures you can have on your property.
It would be exempt from whatever that limit is.
Cool.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Is there
It's not something I've ever run into.
No, these are questions homeowners have asked me.
Really?
Yep, and my
Okay.
reps.
Yeah.
That's why there's such a
Yeah.
list. Is there a minimum distance from the house?
Let's see here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would probably say it's I don't know the answer
do
to
you
that
know
off the
that
top of my
one?
head.
I don't believe there is.
Nobody wants to buy their house normally, but if it's avoiding those offsets from the property line, possibly. But
Okay.
I know that there is because fire code would not want it to be right up next to the home. It is considered a structure, is it not? You need to get a
Yeah.
permit for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I
There
would
could be
imagine-
a setback.
Okay, what about things like propane tanks? People that have a lot of land, a lot of times have propane, they want it over, they put their propane tanks in a place they don't wanna hang out anyway. So
Yep.
they probably want their solar there too,
Building directly over the top of a propane tank would not happen.
but like right in front of them.
We'd probably want a 5-foot setback.
Okay,
Yep.
cool.
I do know that Jay, with you guys, you had us move a propane tank. I don't know if you remember the customer, but we were forced to move a propane tank, and I can't remember why. I think it was for trenching. Is that right? Do you remember? Why would we need to move?
That
for
could have
tren-
been Tyler's job, but yeah, there could have been a maybe we were trenching and there was a propane line possibly
Oh, okay.
that possibly interfered. That
So propane lines are gonna.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be wary of, and you know, how do you find out if there's, you know, once again, you would go to the county and see if you can get your propane lines. If you can't, then your next step would probably most likely you would have to call Dig Alert and have them mark out, and then you know, a solution possibly would be to change your trench path to revise it so you wouldn't have to move it.
So everyone knows the process of ground mounts. Ian explained the ground mounts, but just so everyone knows, you have to have a spot check first, and SDG&E comes out, or your local utility company comes out and marks down where the path is going to be that you're going to be trenching. And from what I understand, you don't have a lot of say in that. Is that right?
No.
You don't have a lot of say in that, and as Ian mentioned, 18 inches, but I've heard it's 12 inches by 12 inches. I guess that depends on the location it's at. But it has,
Yeah.
the point is, it has to be, once you have the dig alert, you do the trench, and then so the trench needs to be dug. If you run into rock, you have to get jackhammers and all sorts of tools to get through that. You need to pay everyone to do it, and then you have to leave it, but you don't just leave it open. I'm told that in your warehouses, you need to have plywood that you put over it so people can walk around without dying, right? Tripping in those things?
No, generally we do not cover the trench
You
temporarily.
don't cover it,
No.
okay. So once it's trenched, you can't just be done with it and put the wire in and fill it up and you're out of there. Isn't there 3 separate inspections that need to happen with that trench? And what are they?
Yep, so typically the first day of a solar ground mount build, we're gonna show up, well, the homeowner will hopefully be there. We're gonna, yes, everybody knows the general area where that ground mount is being built, but when it comes to actually where each post hole is going to be dug, that is a very precise layout, right? Because these posts have to be completely square and nice and straight, and so that it ends up being a nice build. So we get a nice layout. We mark the location of each hole, and then we mark a precise trench path from the ground mount to the house, and then the guys will dig it in that first day. All post holes get dug and the trench gets dug. The following day, hopefully we get a morning inspection from the county inspector or the city inspector from the building department. They're gonna come out and they're gonna look at the holes and make sure the holes are per plan. The building inspector's job is to make sure that the build matches the plan set. He's not supposed to make any judgment calls. He's not supposed to. The plan has already been approved, and so if the build matches the plan, then it should be okay. So his job is to make sure that the plan matches the build. And in sometimes the holes, the size of the holes and the depth of the holes changes depending on how tall the structure is going to be, or what size metal pipe is used, or a number of different things. The wind loads and snow loads and what are the other differences? Anyways, a lot of different situations. So inspector will approve the trench depth and the post holes, and then he's out of there. If that happens that AM, then we've got concrete showing up, and we're going to lay the conduit. Conduit is the 2 or 3 inch PVC pipe that goes through the trench that's going to house
So
the
the first
wire.
one is in the morning, hopefully the morning.
Hopefully the morning.
They come and they inspect the trench was dug properly and the holes were dug properly.
Correct.
Gotcha.
I have some more questions about that. So how deep are these footings? And when you're coming in to pour concrete, do you need like driveway access? What if it's in the back of the house and you can't drive a truck around the back of the house?
Then the guys are going to mix it by hand in wheelbarrows. Get
Okay.
it done.
Yeah.
Which is a risk that contractors take on because they give us salespeople a flat price, right?
Yeah, they do.
And they're obligated to do it because we will cry like babies and force them to.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a home that we actually had to. They wouldn't let us drive on their marble driveway because they were afraid that the trucks would crush the marble, and so the workers had to get cement bags and carry them up a hillside and around the house to get the cement up there where they had to mix it up there. So that took so much time out of the contractor's time, but they're losing money the whole time because they don't want it, because we don't want them to change our pricing, right? And so they do run into tons of obstacles with ground mounts, which is another reason there's an added expense just to mitigate risk.
Yeah, absolutely. So you asked size and depth of the holes.
Yeah.
A typical footing is going to be 36 inches,
Okay.
okay? And that can be 24 inches into the earth and then an additional 12 inches above the earth.
Oh,
And
okay.
that we use, what is it called? It's a really stiff cardboard, basically
Yeah.
tube, right? And so that sits on top of the...
It's a tubing,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, that sits on top of the hole basically, and so you shape the concrete as it comes out of the hole,
Yeah.
another foot up into the air around the pipe that's coming out of the footing, right? Typical footing is going to be 12 inches wide and 24 inches deep.
Okay. So then you have this, like, you lay your conduit, everything like that. My understanding is there voltage drop if it's like a really long way. Does that affect your power production? If you have a DC system and you're bringing it to the main service panel where the inverter is?
There could be potentially marginal losses there. Voltage drop will require an upsize in wiring, right? Thus
Yeah.
costing us more money because larger wire costs more money. So it's more of an issue of wire size than actual production loss because the production loss is going to be marginal.
It's more of a engineering, just specking that out.
Yeah.
of-
Okay.
As far as the distance and stuff, he'll spec it and then increase the wire size.
But it's not something we as salespeople need to
No.
really worry about.
And before we keep going, I want to make something clear. Some contractors' pricings, when you ask them ground mount pricing, is very different than another contractor's price. And what I'm finding a lot of times is I tend to like the higher ones, and it's because, and everyone gets frustrated, and other salespeople come from other companies and try to work with us, and they say, well, that's a lot higher than my other company, but we don't deal with any problems, right? So other companies might come back to these salespeople and say, hey, we need thicker wiring, we can't get the cement up there, we can't do this, can't do this. I found that working with people like Ian and some others, that when they give us a price, they stick with it and they say, dang it, this one's going to be a little bit more expensive and we're probably losing money, right? Sometimes they win and sometimes they lose, but the companies that are lower, they're the scary ones because what are they skipping out on, or what are they?
Yeah.
And then how much are they going to come back and say, I'm going to charge you? And then we have to put our tail between our legs and go charge the homeowner more or amend a contract. And so I tend to like the safer route, and I like safer companies. Now, some companies price them, they say, yes, we do ground mounts, but they price themselves way outside of the scope of doing it. Right, Jay? And I mean, like triple what another contractor would be to do it. Just to say that they do it, not to deter people, but they're really deterring people.
Yeah.
Right?
Fair enough.
So as we listen to this and keep going on, I just want everyone to understand that this is the reason for the expenses, and it's not bad to go with a little bit higher expense. It depends on what you're getting for it. That's the real question, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Cool. Is there like a minimum or maximum grade you can do?
The one build that comes to mind that was absolutely insane. It was probably a $5 million house on Mount Helix, and the hillside was it was a cliff, and they wanted it on the cliff. And we could build it there. The major risk were the giant boulders that could be knocked loose.
Yeah.
Okay? And if we were out in the mountains and those boulders were just gonna go into the valley, so be it. But when there's houses below the boulders, we have to turn that project down, right? And so it wasn't the steepness, it wasn't the grade that declined that project or disqualified that build. It was the risk of knocking, you know, a 10,000-pound boulder loose and it destroying houses below.
Jay, what is your take on that? You said some interesting things earlier about it.
Yeah, so I don't think there is like you know, as far as pitching your ground rack, but I mean obviously you'd want to pitch it at an optimum level, but the grade of the hill that you're working on, I've personally ran into some issues with local AHJs that were telling us anything over a 25-degree slope was we would need to subcontract a geotechnical engineer to come get soil to do basically soil analysis. Yeah, and he would basically we would have to present that report with our plans when we were to go.
Yeah,
get the
why?
permits.
That's crazy. Why? What's the purpose of that?
They're just basically it's a red flag on any grade that is over 25%. Now it could be just a certain HJ requirement, so I don't know, and that's just something that you would have to, you know, those are like possible phone calls that you can call the city and ask, you know, those questions if they require a soil analysis report, but that is something, an additional cost of, you know, thousands of dollars that you would have to tack on.
Actually, speaking of slopes, while we're on, I'm going to use the whiteboard here. And Ian, you tell me, and Jay, because you deal with Ian deals with a lot of the pricing and the actual work. Then you deal with a lot of the logistics and how to get it permitted. If we do have a 25-degree slope, that's probably a lot steeper slope. But I've had customers ask, well, what if we just cut like this, get rid of all this dirt, and install on a flatland, right? They have all this hillside, right? And then they just get rid of all this dirt right here and just cut it out and terrace it. And then they build their solar array like this. Have you heard of anything like that?
I've never ran into that situation. The grading there would be not cost effective.
Right, because we'd need to build a retaining wall here, right?
I think you can get away with 4 or 6 feet without a retaining wall, something like that.
Okay.
But
And,
yeah, I'm definitely not in the retaining wall business.
and if trenching 18 inches is hard, then you probably would not want to take this on, right?
That will require heavy machinery right there. And
Yeah.
heavy machinery is not cheap.
And you wouldn't want to do it for the
No.
pricing of the solar. You just turn it down.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother can of worms that you potentially would be opening.
So there's a balance between you can do a job and then you will do the job, or you want to do the job, right?
Right.
Okay.
Anything's possible. It's just time and money.
There's other factors also that I've ran into on building on people's hillsides, running into environmental issues. I don't know if you've ever ran into some of those issues, but that's another.
What do you mean environment? Oh, like
Like,
the way it looks aesthetically.
Well,
to the
it's
land
the
that it's on?
land is considered an environmental area. You can't actually build there.
Oh,
Like environmentally sensitive areas?
Yeah, like
designated
yeah,
areas?
it's just a
Yeah.
classification basically.
Right. Yeah, just because the land is yours on the map doesn't mean you get to build anything on parts of that land. Right? There are definitely what the heck did they call them? I can't come up with the terminology right
Coastal, like you might have to, like on the coast, even if it's like in La Jolla, I think some of the parts, even inland, are still like part of, you'd have to present not only to the city, but also go take your plans up to with like the coastal committee.
now. Yeah.
So
wow, that sounds like a nightmare.
yeah,
There was designated open space.
right, yeah.
And so-
That's the term, and it's so yeah. You might have 5 acres, and 3.5 of it go down a beautiful little ravine in your backyard into a creek or something like that. And 3.5 of those acres that you wanted to put your solar panels are designated open space. You can't build anything there, even though it's your land.
So it's not necessarily. So when sales reps come to you and start yelling at you and get mad at you, I want you to do this there. The homeowner says we can do it there. Do it, or I'm taking this somewhere else. Do you ever have that kind of stuff with these things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and if it's been sold properly, then, hey, Mr. Homeowner, where would you like this thing to go? Let's go A, B, and C, and then after we do a little bit of homework, we'll be able to tell you exactly where we can put it.
It's a good way to do it.
I like that.
Sam, what other questions have you got?
All right. What programs can you do, like cash, lease, loan, PPA? Is there any program you can't do a ground mount on?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
No.
Is there a minimum system size?
Not through any of the companies, like the finance companies like SunPower, Sunrun, any of
Yeah.
those. Your minimum system size, I believe, comes from what
From the
you guys
contractor.
want, right?
Yeah.
Our,
Yeah, the fixed costs are all there. Rolling a crew and running the wire and the trench, right? If you put 3 solar panels on a ground mount 500 feet from the house,
Yeah.
you're gonna have a $13,000 trench for
Yeah.
$6,000 worth of panels or whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of dumb.
Also, even if they have a flat cost, like I mentioned earlier about base pricing for
Yeah.
solar, even if you have a base cost for ground mounts, their costs might not be covered by the small system. Because if they're sending their W-2 employees out there to dig the trenches or subbing it out or whatever it might be to get these jobs done, these inspections passed, sitting at the DMV county for 8 hours a day, 3 panels might not cover that expense itself,
Totally.
right?
Yeah, the permit costs the same amount.
So
The
even though
plan
they,
set takes the same amount of work to produce, takes the same amount of time to go get the permit. And so, is there just a hard number? Not necessarily, because permits at the county are free. Permits at San Diego are $600, $650.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a judgment call, a one-off judgment call.
Cool.
Yeah.
Checks out. Is there a minimum, like, is there a way it has to be arranged? Does it have to be divisible by 4? Can you have an odd number of panels? What's the maximum height you could go? Could you go like 4 panels? Could you go like 10 panels?
So typically we want to build in increments of 4. We're installing the panels landscape. So
Okay.
portrait is long ways up and down.
Yeah.
Landscape is on its side. And let's see. Let's draw one.
Why landscape? Just out of curiosity.
Because the way the rails sit on the rack. So we've got a post here, another post here. So this is the front row, and then a rail or a post across the top, and then we've got our back row. And then we've got our solar rails. Iron Ridge XR1000 solar rails are going to go this way. Oh, is that all making sense?
Yeah, totally.
And then our panels are going to be mounted landscape across 2, and we typically go, my drawing's getting screwed up here, in groups of 4.
Yeah, I got you.
The XR1000s come in 16 foot. No, they're 14 footers. Will fit 4 panels. They make it like an 18 or 19 footer that will fit 5 if the panels are not if they're not 72 cells. So some panels are wider than others. All of a sudden, those rails are too short.
Got it.
Typically, it's going to be 4, and then we really, for a ground mount to look best, you want it to be divisible by 4. So, because if you in 41 panels, you're going to have 10 rows, and then one little guy sitting over to the side, and unfortunately, it just kind of looks like shit.
Looks dumb. Yeah, I got you.
So, I want you on my team when we play Pictionary. But no, so divisible by 4, and if there's one missing out of there, it's not divisible by 4. It just looks like there's a cutout, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Install it.
But there's cost. If you got to add, if you have to add another 2 posts and extend this guy for one more panel to be sitting over here, right? That's cost.
That's true. That's true.
Fair enough.
What other questions do you have up your sleeve, Sam?
I got a lot of them. Can you like build a shed or do storage or anything underneath your array?
Chances are you're not going to permit that, so as long as it's done after the inspector's gone, yeah, I don't care.
Cool.
We've done one really tall one in the county, in Borrego, right up against the house. So it wasn't touching, but it was literally 6 inches. The panels were 6 inches from, so it was basically built like a patio cover.
Yeah.
The tile roof basically dumped water almost onto the panels, and it was a really low slope because this guy wanted to be able to put his gardening stuff underneath it.
Underneath it.
And when it got that tall, they wanted cross bracing between the posts, so they can make you do something like this, right? And brace these posts this way or between here.
Yeah.
To make the structure just more rigid. And that would screw up his idea of like working underneath it.
Got it.
So instead, we had a structural engineer stamp the plan set, and we upsized these posts.
Okay.
So it went from a 2-inch post to a 3-inch post, and then the engineering calculations worked.
Checked out.
Yeah.
Who's responsible for removing just like brush in general, like debris from the
Yep. We would love it if a homeowner did it, but if a crew shows up and the brush is still there, we're gonna do
Okay.
it.
Can a homeowner reduce their cost by digging trench?
We have a homeowner mention that every now and again, and typically it doesn't work. If they just happen to have he's like, hey, yeah, I got a tractor on the grounds. I've heard that a few times, and it's like, by all means, please.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
But Jay, what's your experience with that though? Because you're in charge. Your job is based on getting these jobs through quicker, and so that the companies can get paid, right?
I mean, if like, like we just touched on, if the homeowner has a tractor, like, please, by all means, you can do the trench, and then we'll come out and have the inspector verify the depth, and then we'll lay the conduit. But it's something that we would usually like to take on because it's less stuff to manage with the homeowner. It's less, there's inspections that we need to coordinate with the city. We're on deadlines usually because sales is, they have deadlines that they need to hit. So it's something usually that we would like to do on our own.
So you run into the risk of the homeowner saying, "Oh, sorry, yeah, you guys have the inspector coming. I forgot. I actually had to go out of town."
Yeah.
Or they don't dig it deep enough, or to the specifications, whatever. And then, actually, I remember trenching. Just speaking of that, we had a job, Levi Gustafson, I remember him, where we had to replace his wiring underground. And I know that there's a certain type of sediment that they wanted under there. It couldn't be rocks, it had to be sand. Do you know what I'm talking about?
DG.
And the inspector came and checked that. And so if the homeowner got any of these specifications wrong, of course, the sales reps are going to get upset at operations and say, why is it taking so long? And you can point the finger, but customers are never wrong, and neither are sales reps, right?
Oh, yeah.
So isn't that better for you guys to just deal with it all together?
Yeah, 100%. And that specific example you're talking about was a major MPU, where that's a whole nother actually can of worms because you're dealing with utility specifications as opposed to just a regular trench line where the local AHJ city will come out. But this is actually inspections where the utilities are coming out as well. So they have their own requirements. So example, a utility trench is 36 inches deep versus just a regular electrical trench is 18 inches deep. So it's
Underground fed main panel service up relocations are about as bad as it gets.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've tried sending a couple your way, and you say, no, thank you.
I'll do them for $12,000.
Oh, there you go.
Deal.
The guys you sent.
Jay?
So do any warranties change when you do a ground mount that the system comes with? Those
No.
warranties. Okay, so power production, maintenance, everything still stands?
Yep.
What about when they warrant it against theft? Now it's not on the roof, so people can actually get it. I know on leases and PPAs, they're warranted against theft.
That would be on the homeowner's insurance.
Yeah.
Okay, is there any additional insurance the homeowner has to cover?
If they own it, yeah, I'm sure, because they own the system.
Yeah.
They don't want to insure it, right?
Okay, so they would just put that on a rider? But for leases and PPAs, nothing would change?
It depends on the contract that you're signing, and it definitely depends, because you have one company like SunPower or Sunrun, that's different for every state, right? So you do need to read through your contracts and see what they say about that.
Okay. Do the sales reps need to worry about leach lines, anything like that? Would homeowners be expected to know that? What questions should the sales rep be asking when they go to the homeowner's house to start saying, okay, just to set realistic expectations?
Yep.
What questions?
One of the
should
main ones I
sales-
ask them, and this is probably the only main one I ask, well, there's two that I ask. The sales training for ground mounts is gonna come at a later time, but technically, are you guys on a septic tank or not?
Yeah.
And if they say a septic tank, then I ask them, where are your leach lines? And 99% of the time they don't know. And even if they do know, we need proof of it, because we have
Yep.
to send it to, get permitted. But if they don't know, then there's no way I can tell them where it's going. And this is probably where I learned from Ian today to use the ABC method. So that, and there's a certain weight requirement that could go on those leach lines, right? You can't, and you can't install in between them too. Is that right?
No.
No, so you have to avoid it. So if there's a perfectly south-facing plane, and it's going to be a 30 kilowatt system, and you're stoked about it, but there's leach lines there, you don't really want to lose out on that commission. So you just say, yeah, you guys told me your price for ground mounts is this. You're going to have to move the septic tank. Go ahead and move it. Right?
Not only are there leach lines that we've got to avoid, there are future leach lines. So,
Oh yeah, for overflow.
no, for
Oh.
when those leach lines don't work any longer because they've just become saturated, right? That happens over 30, 40 years on a septic system.
Yeah.
Those leach lines will just stop working. And so there is an area of land that has nothing in it that is reserved for future leach lines. And you can't build there either.
Fun.
Did not know that.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and,
Yep.
and there are times, and I encourage sales reps all of the time, which none of them really want to do, and I don't blame them. I just did it. You go to county yourself, pull the leach lines, and if you have a meeting with the homeowner and say, this is where I found the leach lines to be, here's the best option I could come up with for you. And then when you hand it over to the contractor, you say, here's the leach lines, here's where they said they want it, do it here. The contractors are gonna love you, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
you've done some
And
work for us.
it will speed your process up significantly.
Yeah.
Cool. So, what time frame should we realistically quote customers?
Well, now you know, after hearing all of these variables, it's kind of impossible to say, right?
6 to 7 years?
What do you think generally?
On a roof mount, I like to say 6 to 8 weeks from contract to PTO, and I'm gonna add 2 or 3 weeks to that. So we're at 10 weeks on a ground mount build.
Alright, well, that sounds totally fair.
I did want to show you some things with as far as trenching goes. When you go to homes, you need to be very creative. You need to be very creative with how you do your ground mounts. Sales reps should actually know what these guys know, which is why we're here today. But if the electrical panel is over here, right? You're not going to want to tell the homeowner that they can put their panels right here in the front yard, because the fastest way to run that conduit is going to be right through the cement and to the electrical, right?
Yeah.
But when you cut up cement like that, you have to pour new cement, and it's not often the same color, especially if there's a driveway. One of the main things people ask on ground mounts is, well, idiot contractor, why don't we just dig a hole and go underneath the cement and run the wire that way, right? And I actually did call a contractor. I talked to him like that. He corrected me real fast.
Like a bowl?
Yeah, just go underneath the hole and then just
Tunnel.
run the wire
A
underneath.
tunnel.
A tunnel, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a tunnel for wires. Makes sense. But he said no, because you can never get the dirt underneath it the way it was before, and then the cement's going to crack, and then they're on the hook for it since they're the contractor, right?
Yep.
Well, you're running off in Las Vegas with your new commission. But okay, and so let's just run it around let's run it around the back then. Makes sense. Let's avoid the cement. Let's do it that way. But then you're running a longer trench line, right? And then there's a way to do it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe contractors don't necessarily want to do this, but we can. Maybe if you
It's
want
our
to.
preferred method. Go to the nearest point of the
trench
house.
to the house, go over the top, go over the roof, and then down to the electrical.
Yeah.
That's a lot of conduit, and homeowners could just maybe not want that. You could run it underneath the overhangs possibly.
Waves, yeah.
And
Through the attic,
there's
possibly.
also an attic run, right? So digging through the dirt as little as possible is optimal.
Yep.
So get creative with the ways that you do it, and explain it to the homeowners. But ABC option is the best. We might be able to do this. I'm not promising you this is how I do it, but I have to make sure it's good. Fair enough.
Yep. That is accurate.
What else, Sam?
I have a lot of other technical questions. What about those ones that yaw? I've gotten that question every now and again.
Sure. So those were popular sun trackers, right? They're going to be east facing in the morning, and they're some kind of gas driven. So there is no motor in them. It's as the sun heats up this an oil or something. It actuates a hydraulic
That's awesome.
something that moves the panel and it tracks the sun. And so in the evening, it ends up being west facing. And then as it cools after the sun goes down, it goes back to east for when the sun's coming up in the morning. That's an expensive structure, right? I mean, that's an expensive structure. If that thing were to have to move, right?
True.
Now you've got moving parts and maintenance, and it's going to break over time if it has moving parts. It wears out. So they were also much more popular when panels were less efficient, okay? As efficiency goes up and panel costs come down, now it makes way more sense to just do a fixed system pointing south that has no moving parts or points of failure and add a few additional panels. Would our panels these days produce more electricity if they track the sun? Absolutely, but you just really complicate the build.
Yeah, and you got more moving parts on
Exactly.
the stand. Yeah, I see.
People don't want to have to maintain these solar
It's
systems.
more of a commercial application.
Yeah, I've just been asked it, but I've only seen it done commercially or in like one time residentially, and there are like 3 of them. Is there any additional maintenance on the homeowner for a ground mount system versus a roof mount, just because it's closer to the dirt?
No.
Cool.
Weed abatement, I guess, would be an issue.
Fair. And for like just designing it, what do we look for? What's important to know before we design?
We touched on a lot of those already. It's the location of the system and what challenges we're going to run up against in that location. Panel count is important, right?
There is a trick that I've started to do. It's how I did that ground mount with you that I sent all the shading and everything I had you check. But a lot of times if you're at a home, on your phone, if you just type in compass, there's a compass on there. If you're at the home, go stand and point your compass the direction that solar is going to be facing.
Yeah.
Right, and set the proper expectations that way. Because if you do find that it's southeast, maybe they don't want that and you face it south, right? And you're going to tell them it's actually going to face this way. Now if you can't use those numbers on your azimuth when you're generating in the solar, because that's not from what I understand, a true azimuth to the sun. It is how we navigate our directions. Is that right?
You're talking
There's
about
like a
magnetic north versus true north?
Yes.
It's off about
Yeah.
10, 15 degrees, but
Yes.
it's
So
a pretty good gauge.
It's an indicator.
Yeah.
Yep.
So one thing you can do is take your compass out and point the direction and do the math accordingly, right?
Yeah.
The other thing that you're going to run into to help with designs is you're going to want to know what's it called? Oh, if you're on a computer designing, what you can do, and this is a cheap way to do it, sometimes you go to the store and it has a 0 to 360 degrees on it. You're going to want one that's transparent with a hole in the middle. You stick it up to your computer and see which way the roof is facing, and that's your azimuth that way.
Yeah.
Right. So to help you with designs, telling you how many panels roughly, and how the electrical is going to look. I even have done it. I've shown our operations. I just draw a circle on here, cut it out, cut a hole out, and just kind of draw where the line is, and then figure out where it is on a compass. But it's really important from a sales perspective, which we'll go over later, and designing to make sure that it's proper. However, I would say ground mounts are probably one of the main things that you're going to want a sun eye for at this point. Is that right?
Yeah.
So to check the production and everything.
Yep.
Okay.
Either that or just be ultra conservative on the numbers that you put into the manual design, or if there is guaranteed production numbers that you've got to meet, then be ultra conservative on those.
Jay, I know you had some notes on ground mounts as well. Is there anything we've missed from you?
No, I think we touched on pretty much because you had a lot of good questions.
Yeah.
Was there any others or?
Let me see if there's anything I can cover. Actually, you answered a bunch of the footing spacing questions just by how we can't build through the middle of a leach line or in the area adjacent, so that really helps.
We built one.
Yeah.
We did build one in the shade underneath a tree because that's where the homeowner wanted it. And yeah, it was a Sunrun lease. It was like Bright Path, right? Is the Sunrun design tool.
Yep.
Yeah.
This was probably when Bright Path first came out. It had to been, I don't know, 2015 or something. And and their tool was wrong. It was just blatantly wrong. You know, homeowner said, I want it there. I don't want to be able to see it. I said, are you sure about that? That's about the worst place on your property it could possibly go for production purposes. And they said, don't care. We want it there. Great. I'll build it there. So we run the Bright Path. Bright Path gives us a number. It's way wrong and like producing at 50%. So Sunrun's cutting them a check every year that it underproduces.
That's nice.
There you go.
Not only is it sitting in the shade, but I come back and check on it like a month later just to say hi to the homeowners. It's covered in leaves. And you know, in that very unique situation, there's a greater chance of debris and things like that settling
Yeah.
on the panels.
to
Doesn't typically happen on rooftops.
Okay.
One last thing, with ground mounts, or did you have another one?
Yeah, is there any equipment that's best? Like if it's on the ground and it's not shaded, does it really matter? Microinverters versus string versus optimizer, like does any of that matter? Is there an equipment that's best?
Sure.
Best for
Or
ground
worse.
mounts specifically?
Yeah.
Or, I mean,
or
there's
worse.
better equipment than others, which we can go over another time, but is
Yeah,
there one
totally.
specifically for ground mounts?
Yeah.
String inverters are the most efficient when it comes to a very simple design that with no shade. So yeah, you look at the efficiency ratings of microinverters or Solar Edge or SunPower, microinverters versus like an SMA string inverter, and the SMA is more efficient when there is no design restrictions or excuse me, there's no
Shade
you're
obstructions.
not going a couple different directions like on a roof install.
Yeah.
You could be facing panels 3 different directions.
Totally.
Right? Can't do that with a string inverter.
Yeah.
So, but then we get into the pros and cons of different types of inverter systems.
Yeah.
Which we'll get into later, yeah.
Yeah.
what you're doing.
So with ground mounts, the other thing I wanted to show you here. When you are talking with the homeowners about the location of them, it's important to paint a picture for them so that when you give it off to the contractors, we're not wasting your time going there and doing site surveys, wasting your time in operations and pushing this account through just to find out that the homeowner doesn't actually want it like that, right? Like paint a lot of worst case scenarios. So if this home has a hillside down here with a fence line like this, and another fence line here, they might say that they want their panels facing south, right? But if that hill's coming off this way and we face the panels south like this, these standoffs right here are going to be probably 2 feet, and then these ones are going to be 15 feet because they have to be the same height
Yeah.
to face south.
Is that bad or?
It's ugly, and the homeowners are going to cancel on you, and you put a lot more work. It's a lot more expensive,
Okay.
right? All you have to do is
And it could require engineering.
could require engineering. All you have to do is set the expectations that if they want it on the hillside, it's staying on the hillside, right?
Yeah, that makes
Or
sense.
there's a happy medium, right? Let's say if you go above 8 or 10 feet, then the jurisdiction's going to have an issue with it, and they're going to want cross bracing and additional sizing on the pipes. And so, we cheat it as best as we can south, but yeah, there's some happy medium that we're aiming for.
Cool. Is there any advantage to splitting it into 2 arrays versus 1 array ever?
We've done it.
Spacing?
Picture a hillside that's, and we're building across the hump in this hillside.
Okay, so you'd split it.
And
build
yeah,
over.
we split it. So we had 2 different arrays basically facing slightly different directions.
Cool.